This episode of Capes and Lunatics is brought to you by Tweaked Audio. To get awesome headphones, go to tweakedaudio.com and use the coupon code Southgate to get 30% off, free shipping, and a lifetime warranty. Or you can get there through the link on our website, southgatemediagroup.com.
Yeah, surf the beat cause the bass is bubbling. Gotta get it in before it comes tumbling down. There's only so much time to find this kind of rhyme to express my mind.
Sweet
that has ever been made will eventually fade
Christmas
like the money
Jive
we
Turkey.
made.
Welcome to the CageCast. Tonight's episode, Season 2, Episode 5. All sold out. Desperate to drum up quick cash for a lawsuit, Luke weighs an offer from a super fan. Mariah invites Tilda to join the new family business. Our director is Cassie Lemons. And our writers, of course, Archie Goodwin. He gets that based on Marvel Comics characters credit, along with George Tuska, Roy Thomas, John Romita Sr., Chio Hadari Coker gets our created by credit. Ian Stokes gets a written by this episode, and we open up with a legal dispute, if you will. Kakarot has decided to sue Luke Cage for manhandlation, which, not for nothing. This is actually, there was a She-Hulk run a couple years back when she was at a Goodman, Lieber, and Kurtzberg. That's a joke because, of course, Goodman was the original publisher of Marvel Comics, and then Lieber and Kurtzberg are the original names of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
Interesting.
Yes, but there was an episode where basically this criminal, the Constrictor, sues Hercules essentially for roughing him up. Hercules, as a superhero, just because he actually has just a wealth of gold because he's a Greek god and all, just gives him a bunch of gold and says, "There you go," and then sort of goes off to have adventures. And suffice it to say, Luke Cage does not have a wealth of gold to do a full Hercules on this. And we have our negotiation with Foggy and Luke, as well as our elder lawyer of the Stokes family, who is here representing Cockroach as part of the protection that Cockroach pays for from the Stokes. And I like this storyline expressly because, we've mentioned before about the idea of the biblical tale of Samson. And the idea of, the guy who is gifted by God with great power, who, uses that power for good, sure, but maybe is not grounded in his faith in his community to use that power, to understand what that goodness is. And in this moment, what we're seeing is, of course, the powerlessness of Luke Cage.
Right.
And this, of course, is the powerlessness because he is, at his core, though he rejects the title, a hero. Because essentially a man with power, the Kingpin, upon being sued by someone in some frivolous way, may simply make that person go away.
Right.
But Luke Cage does not see that he can do that. That this is not how he wishes to operate. He wants to be a good man. And good men don't simply snap the necks of bad people. So he is powerless in this. And in this moment, Foggy is our one with power. Foggy is Luke Cage's superhero, who is going to explain to him the nuances of this, and essentially say, look, you need this is an amount of money that'll make this all go away. And if we make it go away, that solves that problem. Because the fact of the matter is, you don't wear a mask, you're committing vigilante justice, and, that's technically against the law.
Right. I mean, my whole point is, Luke wasn't at all in the right here. He has no leg to stand on. He was completely in the wrong. It's not something he should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, it only seems to make sense that humans, non-special humans, would have apparatuses like this to protect themselves and make the world a fair place. And that's why we have laws and why he should be held accountable in a sense. And obviously, Cockroach is making more of it than it needs to be. But, I can understand his point. That's the enemy. You inconvenience him in any way you can. I'm not mad,
No, well, exactly. But of course, this is idea. This is part of Luke's arc in this story. And I think it makes this great point because, of course, first we have, the beatdown, and we've had, he gets knocked out of, he goes, when he first goes to Cockroach's club, and he gets knocked out the window. And then he gets knocked down by Bushmaster. No. And then, it's just one indignity and another indignity. And it is this fact that, being this bull moose in a china shop isn't a practical way to approach the concerns he has. That if he truly wishes to be a hero, sometimes the heroic thing is to actually not press forward on it, or to make a frontal attack, or as Hannibal Smith used to say, do a classic half pincer movement. Little fun A-team joke there. A pincer movement is when you come around the sides and cut off the supply line, the lines of a troop, so that you eventually, instead of attacking frontally, you attack from the side flanks to essentially encircle your enemy. A half pincer is basically just, we'll hit them from the left and hope that they don't regroup. and Luke, of course, just attacks frontally, and that's his problem, is that he feels so bulletproof. He doesn't understand that bullets aren't his biggest fear.
Right.
Because not for nothing, he has been shot many times, but really, things that have really hurt him that we've seen in the series are the shotgun to the head, which he still has to deal with, those concussions.
Right.
He's still all soft on the inside.
Well, yeah, that, and his mind is just as suggestible as anybody else's. He was taken over by Kilgrave and used to great effect by him,
Yes, which of course implies he is easily manipulated, which is something that may come up later. It is an interesting place to start this episode. Moving on from that start, we do have the idea that, Luke needs to get this money, and he gets an offer from a character we've already met, which is Mr. Piranha. Piranha wants basically to have a celebrity guest at his event because he has money, so he would like to spend it, because that is apparently all people think you can do with money.
Right.
And which is ironically actually all you can do with money, but it's not always something you have to do with money. So he is, and I also love this scene because you have Luke essentially sort of bidding up the price more than what Foggy wanted, because Foggy was going to do the whole thing for 50 grand. He wants 150 grand, so he does 100 grand to take care of cockroaches. Cockroach and has a nice little nut afterwards.
Now this seems to me kind of like, really? Like, okay, the man owes, or, Cockroach wants 100,000, so why are you going to charge 50 for this? It just seemed odd to me.
Oh, because Foggy is not the bold man of action. You see, that's the thing. Foggy is practical and circumspect, and not for nothing. As he said, this is not necessarily what he does. He's doing it because, he has found himself in this weird spot of superhero law. Something that one imagines later stories, if we actually get later stories, because of course Netflix and Marvel they're in that weird spot right now. They're kind of X's. They're like kind of X's with benefits right now. So this burgeoning field of heroic law. People like I'm blanking on her name. From Jessica Jones.
Hogarth.
Hogarth, thank you. Hogarth, who is actually her character is actually from the Heroes for Hire series. Yes, that characters like Hogarth and Foggy Nelson are burgeoning into. Superhuman law is, in fact, a real field of law in the Marvel Universe that these people have to come deal with, but it is new. And so, from Foggy's perspective, he's trying to pitch Luke as a DJ when he's a superhero. And the price difference is very different.
But it just seems to me like if I'm hiring a lawyer, I would hope he has my best interest at heart. And if the guy has money and we need 100,000, it just seems silly to be asking for 50.
Yeah, well, it seems silly, but then again, the guy may say, well, then you know what? Let me go get Jessica Jones. She can lift a Buick. No, what's silly is once he knows he's a super fan, and that's essentially what Luke is coming from, because of course when Piranha gets when Foggy first gets the offer, he doesn't really know who this guy is. He just knows he's a fan, and so he's giving him a standard rate, which is $50,000. But once they get in that room and they see how obsessed this guy is with Luke Cage, then Luke Cage ups the ante and goes for the 150. And basically, I think what Foggy is doing is saying, I don't want to kill this first golden goose that showed up. If we got half the money, at least that's a start. We can work with that. Maybe we can lift a car to bar mitzvah later. And work it out, because I'm sure there's someone who there are other people who want this moment. But of course Luke, seeing that he is a super fan, then ups the ante, ups what it's going to be. Foggy might have done that on his own too, but doesn't get the chance because Luke is the man of action. But of course, even in that moment as a man of action, Luke, because he is a man of action, doesn't read the fine print.
Right.
And then he has to wear the bullet hole-ridden hoodie to the party. That basically his costume choice isn't his own.
Which is understandable. I don't think he should have been that mad about it either. Just go do the job. You owe the money. Go do the job.
You and me do that, but neither you or me are superheroes.
Right, but have some humility, you know what I mean?
Well, but that's what that scene is meant to imply.
Yeah.
It's meant to say you need humility, Luke. Even as his unlovable father says to him, which is, honestly, the character of his father. The actor sadly passed, but the character that he plays is such an awful human being on every level that we ever see him at. He is so self-righteous and so he is so full of whataboutisms. But of course, the thing about him is that just because he is bad doesn't mean he's wrong.
Right.
We'll get into that a bit in the next episode, but from the reality of Luke Cage, he needs to be brought low. He needs to be humbled because he has become too full of himself. He is,
Yeah.
for those who don't know, the myth of Perseus. If you ever watch Clash of the Titans, Perseus he captures he captures the Pegasus. He's the only man to ever ride a Pegasus. He eventually slays monsters. I believe he actually slays the Chimera, not the Kraken, in the actual myth, but he does slay the Chimera. He does all these great things. And then he decides, because he is the son of Zeus, he deserves a seat on Mount Olympus. And he commands Pegasus to fly him up Mount Olympus, and Zeus shoots a lightning bolt down and kills him. It's a very sad story. The Greeks were known for really, and what it is, of course, with the Greeks, these myths are all story go-rounds. So they go and they go and they go, and then, but they have a tendency very often to end on real sour notes, because the last guy to tell that story is the guy who deconstructs the myth, and that guy becomes super popular, sort of like, Frank Miller's Batman,
Right.
Once you deconstruct the myth, you get real popular among other people. So Perseus, so full of himself, tries to ascend Mount Olympus, gets struck down by Zeus himself. Likewise, Luke Cage has spent the first part of this season trying to insist he is, the bulletproof man, should be the boss of all bosses, should be given the status that no one should cross him just because he is he. And this is about how the world doesn't really work like that. You don't get to declare yourself a god. You don't get to move to Mount Olympus just because you've slain all sorts of monsters. Within this storyline, we actually get some nice bits with
Mariah and Tilda.
Yes, thank you. Mariah and Tilda.
I love that.
Yeah, well, honestly, the Mariah Tilda story is so fascinatingly complex. As, you can see that Tilda certainly is pulling away from Mariah, does not want to be with Mariah. And there is this constant question in our minds: is Mariah reaching out to Tilda for political reasons? And we certainly see that the impetus is because of the politics presented by the reporter who wants the mother-daughter reunion story. Or is there a real emotional connection between them? And
Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I want to hear your thoughts.
So I think the way she approaches the argument about right or wrong with her is very interesting and very telling about how she feels about that. And the way when Tilda comes at her and points to all the bad things that she's done, instead of sitting there and arguing whether or not she did them, she immediately owns up to them and says, yes, but she changes the paradigm and says, but that's what is required for someone like us to get out ahead of the oppression and of the inequality. And so I thought that was really, really interesting. She doesn't waste any time arguing any of Tilda's points, but immediately accepts them, so sort of disarming them in a way, and then arguing that the world is different than you see it, and arguing that instead. So in that, I don't think she can separate the two ideas of political versus family, because that's, I think, one and the same to her. Family is legacy, and that is political. Well, so yes. I think she wants her to be in with her, and she makes a valid claim. Come help me clean this up, I've got us here, and nothing that was worth doing was done without some hard times. So join me now. And she means it, even if the political gain is an actual goal for her. To do it with family would be even better. And I don't think that you can say that one isn't true if one is,
Well, yes. And this is I think, it makes a wonderful parallel um, I know you watch The Sopranos, and everyone loves The
Mm.
Sopranos. But this argument is made all the time in The Sopranos, and it's made by Meadow. With this idea that when Italians first came to this country, we were this oppressed group, and yada yada yada, and the only way you could get ahead was through this crime.
Mm.
And it's an interesting juxtaposition of that argument with Mariah, because, of course, when Meadow Soprano makes it, it is her justification for her wealth that isn't really an honest argument at that point in history. There is not this oppression of the Italian American community. It becomes the uh, white white ethnicity the white ethnicity excuse that because we are white ethnics, we actually are still oppressed in the way our ancestors were, and so we must maintain this tradition of criminality to move us all forward. Um, Now, by contrast, Mariah very much is cognitive of the fact that no, the Irish and the Italians are still trying to move in on their turf. That
Mm.
all the things that Buggy Stokes had to fight, 50 years ago, are still the case in point now.
Mm.
That that we are still in this difficult position, but even within it, there is this convolution that Mariah was a councilwoman,
Mm.
that she was a powerful politician. But of course, that powerful politician status came expressly because her brother's criminal activity financed it. So it is about this. Whereas Meadow Soprano's arguments were hollow because there was not a cause at this point in history for Tony to say, well, we have no other choice.
Mm.
There is this choice first presenting itself to the Stokes because of the wealth that they have accumulated through criminality. And Mariah, for her heart, is trying to fix that. They're trying to go legit. They're trying to pull a Kennedy. You get your bootleg in, and then which is actually kind of a mythos about the Kennedy family, that they made their money in bootlegging. They actually had a great deal of money prior to the bootlegging, though they did do a lot of bootlegging as well. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I just find it it's interesting as we talk about power and the dynamics and humility.
Mm.
Because I think that Mariah is very much a woman who is humbled by her world and her powerlessness in it, even as she wields great power.
Mm.
She is always aware that there is someone just around the corner ready to take her down because of where her wealth comes from. And she is trying to secure her position. And you contrast that with a Luke Cage, who I think is trying to say, no, I'm powerful. I don't want to hear from anyone that I'm not. And of course, that just leads to his own hoisting by his petard. There's a lot of petard hoisting that I think happens to Luke Cage this season. Well, we do get to we have a couple of things going on. We also have in this episode Misty dealing with her mentor. Why am I blanking on his name now too?
Scarf.
Scarf. Thank you.
Mm.
It's good
Those are
that one
great
of us doesn't
scenes.
drink before these podcasts. That's all I have to say. Yes, that she's dealing, and we get this great flashback
Yeah.
of Misty being a frustrated cop, the way I'm sure so many cops are,
Mm.
because there are people who are criminals who they can't show to be criminals in a court of law. And it is that it's a great dynamic about power and powerlessness that we are always in this state where we're like, we want law to be fair and honest. But in order to be fair and honest, it must be a system, and a system can always be gamed. And then you have this conflict between those who will game the system and those who will be protected by the system.
Right, but I think what people fail to realize is that the idea that we will ever have a static understanding of these things, that it will not constantly be changing, or fooling themselves. So the conflict and the fight is life. It is what we are here to do, is to constantly be fighting that balance.
And
I mean, you know?
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that is the answer to what we're looking at in this, is that as you are looking at this path, and it is so easy to see it as two single paths.
Mm.
As, shall I go down the path of corruption
Mm.
with the good intentions that the road to hell is paved with, or do I remain on the straight and narrow as I see it, and see so much evil wrought because I will not look left or right?
I think the key to that is something you get from watching The Dark Knight with Harvey Dent's character.
Yeah.
And where he says, you've got to understand that you've got to either give yourself to the cause, or you will end up being taken for the opposing side. So either you'll become the villain, or you have to give yourself to the cause. And if you don't monitor that, it's easy to fall to the other side. And so, again, playing the balance, you've got to make those decisions when it's okay to do the bad things. And are you managing to keep yourself straight, or are you falling closer and closer? And as long as you play that balance, and as long as you give yourself to the cause before the bad decisions pile up too high, you'll be okay, I think.
Yes, although within that entire concept, you have this question of, are there lines you must not cross?
Oh, well, yeah.
And that's the that is the thing, because it comes to this idea of planting evidence. And we see, and not for nothing, we can play this in an interesting way when we talk about, when Scarf first discusses this, he's talking about putting a bag of heroin in someone's car when he's doing the joke, test the waters, can I bring you into the corruption world? Which and he does it straight face, and he goes, "Hi, I was just joking. I was testing you, and you passed. Good for you that you passed that little test I did."
For all her powers of perception, supposedly.
Well, yeah, but we're most blind to the things we want to see.
Right.
If there's anything that is a truth of all of this, is that when we don't want to see something, it is easily made invisible. And when we want to see something, it is clear as day that was what we saw. And in this case, but in that case, what I was going to say is, like, slipping H into someone's house to be found, that guy probably was doing something. Like, the line that was crossed was maybe just, well, now we've found what we know you've been doing. In the case of putting a Judas bullet in Cockroach's house,
Right.
I kind of feel like that's a line too far to cross. You know that's
Right.
a, yeah.
Because, I mean, if we're saying these rules are set up to protect us from superheroes and to make the world fair, then it's equally, being used to protect us from the superpowers that we afford the law.
Hmm. Well, exactly, and the law is, as we see at the very start of this, the law is incredibly powerful. It is the one thing that could defeat the supers in the Incredibles was lawyers. Their powers are greater than any could imagine because their
Mm,
power is the idea of a structured society.
mm,
And in a
mm.
structured society, law is omnipotent. But of course, because it is a structured society, law can be gamed. And it becomes this question, do you play the game or do you break the game? And if you break the game, um, what happens next? Because once you make that choice to cross that line, to say, well, I'll break the game to win this round,
Mm.
um, then what happens next? What happens to both the respect of the game itself that you rely on? Because if it wasn't for respect for the law, the world might be lawless.
Right.
Um, and and then what happens with this crime we've just committed? How are we better than anyone else that we have committed this crime as well? Um, yeah, it's honestly, there's a lot you can dig into these kind of series. But of course, in the end, it all comes down to heads on a pike.
Right. I think the only democratic way to solve the question is to say that if you are going to take a shortcut, you have to be a samurai about it, and you have to like give yourself to the cause and be, one of the people that gets to die for the cause, whatever job that needs doing. You know what I mean?
Well,
So if you're going to break the law, and that's the only way you can guarantee that none of these decisions to take shortcuts compound too much. Because as soon as you make the decision to do that, you have to die. You have to give yourself somehow to the cause.
well, so are we saying that we must commit seppuku, or are you saying,
Yes.
oh,
If
well,
you're,
okay,
yeah, that's the
yeah.
only way to
So
maintain
I will
honor
do
after
this. I
breaking the
will do
law.
this action, and then I will. Well,
Right.
and that's a great idea. The only problem with it is that because the law continues after death,
Mm.
because there is a societal structure.
Right. But it's a
Actually,
wild
and
card. It's a wild card, a very
I know,
expensive wild card, you know?
but no. But what I'm saying is, so that sounds good on paper. So
Right. Yeah.
so to give
Yeah.
you so let me give you an example. So let's say that Misty plants the bullet. The bullet
Right.
gets found. 2 days later, Misty eats her gun because she has to end herself.
Right.
Now that
No, but
becomes
like that's what, no, but in that situation, she wouldn't do that because the cost would be too high. And if you just make it a menu item and just make the cost really high, I think you can manage how people use the ability to make that choice, you know?
well, I mean, I guess I mean, but again, like I said, anytime that you and this is the thing, anytime you start to talk about the costs, then it becomes a gameable situation.
Right, but the
So if
game
we
is the situation.
what,
The game is life.
But the point
That
is, the game is already the situation. That the game is
right.
that we can either convict this man legally and reasonably, or we can cross a line to convict him.
Right, but that line, if you make that line crossable but very expensive, people will be judicious about when they use it. And I think it can be
Eh,
a useful tool to have.
I think that assumes way more logic than has ever been present in the human
Mm,
race. I
mm.
think that if humans were logical and market driven, we would actually not have a we would know what the stock market would do tomorrow.
Mm.
Because clearly the logic would say this is what we do. If it was all ones and zeros, then everything would equal one at the end of the day. Um, but it's not all ones and zeros. Two does exist, and as much as we wish two did not exist, there is a two, and that is what I think is the point of this, is that if you see life as ones and zeros, it will be a doomed scenario. You have to understand that there is not just two paths, because any path you can walk on has multiple strings within that path. And in the end, you can always forge the third path, which is I will be the first to walk across the grass. Because paths are worn by people walking across a line for so many years, but there is nothing that says you cannot walk your own path in that. And finding that place to walk, which is what Luke Cage is trying to do, and what I think Misty Knight will eventually do as well, is the point. That there is another way to go, but the question is how can I be both in society and of society, but exist outside of its rules and norms? And I think we get the answer somewhat in this episode, and more in the next episode, in the idea of the hero for hire. The hero for hire is the idea of the person outside the law who is living within the structures of society and cognizant of the rules of society, which says that there is always a cost. And I do believe that if you've ever watched actually, Mozz, I'll tell you right now, if you've never watched it, you should watch Have Gun Will Travel.
Have what?
Have Gun Will Travel.
Interesting. What is that?
It's an old cowboy show about a character named Paladin, who is essentially a mercenary.
A mercenary named Paladin.
And yeah, I know.
Okay.
Not for nothing. His name is Paladin Templar. So
okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, it goes way into the whole thing. I believe that it was Paladin Templar, but anyway, yes. But he's a mercenary. He is a gunslinger in the Old West. And he has this ad in the San Francisco Gazette that says "Have Gun Will Travel," and people will write to him and say, "Here is my situation." And sometimes he will read about a situation. He will send letters with his card that says "Have Gun Will Travel," that he is a gunslinger for hire, and if you are willing to, that he will do that. And of course, I remember there was a great episode a few weeks back, because it plays periodically on both MeTV and Heroes and Icons. I think Antenna does it from time to time too, where he's basically reading about this cattle war, and he takes out two envelopes. He sends one to one end of the guy and one to the other guy. So who's interested in hiring the Paladin? And of course, and the idea in being the Paladin is I have my own code, and he does have a very strict moral code. He's a very learned man, as we see throughout many episodes, where he suddenly starts talking about chemistry, and he's always trying to do right. But he is trying to do right within the context of the societal rules in place about what someone can hire another man for, essentially. And for what it's worth, this is the progenitor, as we spoke earlier, of Hannibal Smith of the A-Team, of the idea of the people who are out there for hire, to do good by doing just a little bit of wrong that no one else was willing to do, but for a price to make it all seem a little weird. And to that extent, we do get Luke Cage at his party. And we have two things that happen here, because there's two parallel storylines. One is the finding of the heads on the pike.
Right.
which, of course, after Tilda has been wooed, we get to the chaos of the heads. That when they open the clinic, there are all these heads on pikes, one of which is, of course, cockroaches. And at the same time, while Luke is at the party, and he has to talk Piranha down from shooting him. And I love this because
he tries, he doesn't succeed.
Piranha doesn't shoot him. Someone else shoots him.
I feel like the gun went off and he did in the melee at first, so he doesn't at all?
I don't think so. I've watched it twice, but it's been a little while since I watched it.
Okay.
But what I love about that scene, there is, and I can't remember the name of it, but when poor Ben Affleck played George Reeves. And there's a scene where he's doing like a little performance and he does a little celebrity event as Superman at a theme park. And all of a sudden this kid pulls out a gun to shoot him. Like a real gun. Like he took his dad's gun, because this was the 50s. And he takes his dad's gun, has it in his little kid holster, but he pulls it out, and George Reeves, of course, immediately recognizes that's a real gun. And he has to explain to the kid, look, if you shoot me, it's going to ricochet. And that ricochet could hit anyone here. I love that it's true, but it is also Luke Cage essentially explaining to a person who is acting like a child why just shooting a bulletproof man is not a good idea. So I love that, because to me, I felt that was meant to be a tie-in. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe that's just me over Afflecking things, but I love that. But what I wanted to say is that in this moment of the attempt to steal Piranha, in this moment of the beheadings at the clinic, we're essentially seeing someone who has rejected society's rules in total. And that basically, while everyone else is bound by, even when they don't want to be bound by law, there are others that are not. And that is why we need Paladin. That is why we need Luke Cages. Right. That is why, to some extent, we maybe even need a Mariah Stokes. Because there are those who will not respect the order of society, and who will call themselves heroes for not respect. But at the same time, these are also people that do not consider what the end result is. That without a society to essentially control things, that we would find ourselves in a spot where only the strongest survive. And the sad truth is that it will be the Stokes and it will be the Cages who are those who are strongest who survive, not, unfortunately, your Bushmasters. Because as much as they'd like to think they have gained power, the only power they have is the power to violate the rules of society. And I think we see that with Bushmaster when everyone tells him how the things he does to his body are killing him.
And the things that he's doing to society are hurting his own people.
Well, exactly. And that, I think, is what it is that I think that if there's an overarching theme here, it is that we are powerless within society. And it is not right that we are powerless in society, but the alternative is so much worse. As the old saying goes, democracy and capitalism are the worst ideas ever created by humanity, except for all of the others. It's not that they're great ideas, it's that everything else is so much worse once it's broken down. Now, of course, you have a grand argument with democratic socialism, but of course then you get into this idea of course, democratic socialism is actually still largely capitalist and still largely, it's a democracy tempered by socialism and a capitalism tempered by democracy. And if you have those things, you could actually have something that might work out.
Right.
But of course, it's still a system. It's still going to get gamed.
Right. But
and the real dark truth of it is how much are we willing to allow ourselves to be gamed to let a society move?
Right. But I think, again, we should understand that it always needs to be a balance. And There will be gaming, and that's part of it. Why else are we here? But, we should always keep changing the rules because it is to be gamed, and that is people's job to figure it out, and it's our job to protect ourselves against it. And if we start doing a bad enough job, we ought to course correct, pretty sharply sometimes. But that is the game. Fighting the game isn't something that should be lamented. It should be revered, in a sense. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And at the end of the day, it's good to be a superhumanly strong, bulletproof guy. Because when you do have to reassert order and structure to a chaotic situation, nothing helps better than being able to jump down and stop a car before it runs out with the guy they're trying to steal. I think that's a great ending for tonight's episode. Mozz, how can people reach out to you if they'd like to talk to you about all of the things that we have discussed tonight? And we did discuss a lot of things. How can they do so?
They can email me at mozzmanzor@gmail.com or find me on Facebook under Mozz Manzor. That's MOZZ. MANZOOR.
And of course, you can always write to me in the old-fashioned email way the way our Mozz and Pods once did at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter as I live tweet things when they come back from hiatus, which by the time you hear this may be the case, in which case we're talking Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Cloak and Dagger, and anything else I darn well please. At Charlie Esser, that's CHARLIE. ESSER. Look for the 2 E's in the middle. Ping! For quality. Sweet Christmas, jive turkeys. We have walked down the alleys of darkness. We have feared no evil. Thank you for coming to the CageCast tonight. And please come and break out of that cage with us again next week. Good night.